All right. My name is David Agranoff, and I'm the author of The Vegan Revolution with Zombies, Boot Boys of the Wolf Reich, the Wonderland Award nominated Screams from a Dying World, which, by the way, is about to be reissued, and Punk Rock Ghost Story. We just recently, myself and my buddy Marvin, who I'm going to be talking to here, have started doing reviews for Dread Central. So you can see our reviews starting next week from when this was recorded on dreadcentral.com. But my reviews are up on my blog, davidagronoff.blogspot.com, going back to 2006. Marvin, introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Marvin Vernon. I run a book review blog called Novel Pursuit that specializes in horror, science fiction, and occasional mystery and suspense thriller. You can also catch my reviews at my Goodread page. I also review for a number of websites, including Hell Notes. And as David already said, I'll be helping him out on the Dread Central reviews.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about the newest release by Joe Hill called Strange Weather. Now, I know I try when talking about Joe Hill not to talk about his father, Stephen King, but it gets hard when he does things that are so very Stephen King. And by putting out a book of 4 short novellas, that's really a Stephen King thing to do. He did it with, most famously originally with Different Seasons, and most recently with Full Dark, No Stars. And much like, in my opinion, one of the things about Stephen King is that when he puts out these collections of novellas, you see like how that's like the perfect size for a Stephen King story is like the novella length, and I have a feeling we're going to feel the same way about Joe Hill here. We didn't read each other's. Well, I haven't posted my review yet. I looked over Marvin's review, so we're going to be kind of freewheeling on this. But I know me personally, I was not a huge fan of Joe Hill's last epic novel, The Fireman, and I'm pretty sure you felt the same way too, right, Marvin?
Yes, I did. I wasn't all that crazy about it, but as I mentioned to you, I did love Walter Ross too. So,
Yeah, and that's the thing is that we both like Joe Hill as a writer. I personally, his short story collection, 20th Century Ghosts, I think is fantastic. I loved Horns. I have not read Nosferatu or Heart Shaped Box yet. I intend to read them at some point. But I was rooting for the firemen. That's the thing is I thought the concept was great. And for me personally, I loved the first 150 or so pages of the firemen, and I liked the last 75 a lot. The problem is there were 600 pages in between. And, it's not to say that I read them all, so the writing was technically good, but the story was just kind of meandering and lost. And so what we have here with Strange Weather is a chance to see Joe Hill writing shorter pieces. And so maybe we can just talk overall impressions of the book and then take each novella one at a time.
okay,
Overall,
that sounds good. I just want to say that I have read all his novels,
mm-hmm.
and if you haven't read Heart Shaped Box, you really need to. I think that still is that what his person is still at best in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, it's my intention to read it. I don't know why I haven't read it. I would say overall, Strange Weather as a total book is a really excellent example of what Joe Hill can do as a writer, and I think specifically, I think more, the last 2 books were a little bit in his father's shadow because they were so much, let's face it, they were very Stephen King type of stories. And yes, that there are some similarities here in Strange Weather, but I also think that there's novellas specifically, like the third one, Afloat, that are, I can't imagine Stephen King writing that, right? And so I'm hoping that that this book will kind of take Joe Hill out of the shadow of his father. How did you feel about the book overall?
Overall, I really liked it. I do think it shows Joe Hill writing four novellas that are quite different. And in that way, he is getting a little bit out of his father's shadow. The first one, Snapshot, I won't say too much about it yet, but the first one, Snapshot, is the one that is most like Stephen King. But the other three I think, go in entirely different directions. So I do think if someone is thinking Joe Hill is a clone of his father, they really should read this because it shows what variety he has and what he can do. I like pretty much three of them and wasn't too crazy about the last one. I'm sure we'll discuss some of them in more detail.
Yeah, we'll go through each one. So let's start with Snapshots. So I believe that this novella was originally published in Cemetery Dance under the title Snapshot 88. And I read it originally. I didn't read it when I got my copy of Strange Weather because I had already read it in Cemetery Dance. And there was for those of you who aren't familiar, Cemetery Dance is a horror journal out of Maryland that supposed to come out every other month, but it comes out a couple times a year. And they did a special double Joe Hill issue that has interviews with him, and it featured this novella, Snapshot. One of the interesting things for me about Snapshot was he said that he hand wrote this novella while staying in Portland for the Nosferatu event at Powell's Books, which I went to. So I thought that was kind of neat for me that we saw him in Portland right around the time he was writing that. And Snapshot it's really smart, paranoid thriller about dementia. And so, in that sense, it's a very strange novella that kind of defies structure. What did you think of Snapshot?
Um, well, like I said, I think Snapshots are very much like something that King would do. It's an interesting one. It's sort of a coming of age with a big twist in it, I thought. Structure, I don't know. It would seem pretty straight, linear to me. It uses a kind of common, forgive me for saying this, common King technique in which is an older man reminiscing over an odd event he had with a very evil person, basically. So
Yes, but
that's why I think it's a King type structure.
right, but it was told through basically old Polaroid images, right?
Right. Okay.
And so I think now, granted, I read this one longer ago than I did the other ones. So my memory of it is that a lot of the structure is derived from the pictures, and progressively as the story goes on, the narrator becomes less reliable. And I think, and it's okay, I think, to compare. I mean, obviously, it feels different to compare to Stephen King when you're talking about one of his sons, right? But
Right.
but the reality is, how often do we compare all horror writers to Stephen King in the modern era, right? And there's really nobody who has more of a name that's synonymous with horror than Stephen King. So, like, yes, it's too bad because it's his father, and you don't want to cast that shade on somebody to live up to, especially when But I think Joe Hill is a pretty confident guy, and I think he did it the right way. He didn't ride on his father's coattails from the beginning, and he made a career for himself. And So, anyways, but yes, this story of the four is, I agree with you, is the most Stephen King-ish of the four. And in a lot of ways, I would say that the second one, Loaded, is in many ways, well, not the least, but it is definitely less Stephen King. Loaded is an interesting novella because it is an extremely political novella. And it's, I would say, probably, depending upon the time when he wrote it, that it was probably more of a commentary on George Zimmerman than actual. Like, I know everyone says that it's about gun culture, and yes, it looks at gun culture in various ways. But I think specifically the novella was looking at the life of George Zimmerman, the guy who shot Trayvon Martin, and how his like how the public viewed him changed over time. Now, something that I said in my review about Loaded is, and this might make it sound really corny, but in many ways Loaded is very Crash-like, not the Cronenberg Crash, but the Oscar bait movie Crash, where it takes various angles of a social political issue and weaves them together that essentially seems nonlinear in the beginning, but the story is very linear. It has beginning, middle, and end. And it Loaded is basically about the various aspects of gun culture coming together. What did you think of Loaded?
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. It's I for the first, I'm not sure how many pages, but at the beginning, I really wondered how you're going to bring basically these three stories together. And there's also a time frame involved here that doesn't at first make sense, but comes together. So one of the things I really liked about it is how it came together and how it went from. I think Crash, the movie Crash, is a perfect example. How it went from three ideals to all three becoming connected and having the characters come together in the main plot. One thing I want to say is that you mentioned that it's the most unlike King. Well, I think it's actually the most unlike Joe Hill. It's actually very different than anything he's done before. No supernatural element, more of a suspense thriller, and very political, as you already stated.
True. That is an interesting way to look at it. The thing about Loaded is that we know that he comes from a very progressive family, and these progressive ideals are there. And certainly Joe Hill has been outspoken on his Twitter, for sure. But I was a little surprised by this novella and how pointed and how direct the point of view was. And I think, sure, that message will turn off a few readers, but I really enjoyed this novella. I thought it was, it was interesting too, because when you start talking about the different threads coming together is, Joe Hill is very, when you say it's very unlike Joe Hill, I'd say the number one reason why it is very un-Joe Hill Loaded is that I don't see how he could have written this without outlining it. It feels outlined. And, one of the things that annoyed me the most about The Fireman was that the book really desperately needed some reining in. And in the middle of the book, for no good reason, the characters actually bash the concept of outlining in the text of the novel, right?
I didn't notice that, but okay.
Yeah, there's a scene where the characters are trying to escape from the cult in The Fireman, and for no good reason, they're talking about their plan, and one of the characters says, "You sound like an outliner," and it really took me out of the book too, because there's no reason why that character would suddenly go off on a tirade about how outlining books doesn't make sense. The character wasn't even an author, right? And it was a terrible, terrible moment in that book. But Loaded really feels outlined. It really feels like it's well plotted and comes together great. So I'd be really impressed if he did write it from the seat of his pants. But as a plotting guy, I really enjoyed that aspect of Loaded. Sorry for the digression on the fireman, but I actually wrote about that scene in my review of the fireman because like I dog-eared that page and made a really big deal about it because.
Well, Loaded is a way I would like to see him go again soon. Something that is, well, not necessarily political, but something that is more of a suspense thriller type. And I'll just say, without saying what it is, I'll say the ending that floored me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ending was great. Yeah. And we are trying to avoid spoilers, so yeah.
We'll do that.
Yes, yeah. Good job. So the third novella in the book is called Aloft. And that's where things get a little weird. Or a lot weird. And this story, to me, was to me the most unking, of the novellas because this is something that was very the imagery in this novella is very thick. It's very beautifully written. Not to say the king can't write, pretty prose, but I think this is something that I think is more in Joe's wheelhouse. And this story of a skydiver who, like, if you try to explain the concept of Aloft, it just sounds like it doesn't sound like a story. It's just like, oh, a skydiver falls on this weird cloud, right? And all these bizarre things happen. And I'm guessing that this novella will probably not do super well with the fans. Like that, I think a lot of people will consider this their least favorite. However, I enjoyed this novella a lot, and I think that the feeling of imagination that comes out in Aloft is really impressive. I really liked Aloft. How about you?
So did I. It is again. It's different to Hill for Hill, and I'm trying to think. I thought in some way it reminded me more of Clark Aston Smith, a little Lovecraftian circle like, although it wasn't. There wasn't any type of Cthulhu stuff in it. But the cloud itself was certainly of fantastical nature, very different than anything I've seen from Hill.
And thankfully, thankfully he didn't explain it. He didn't try to make sense of it. It just happened. And I really like that.
And on the three fantasy story here, or horror story, if you want to call them that, he doesn't really explain any of them very much at what's going on. And I like the idea the cloud was not explained specifically.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with something called a short story called Horror of the Heights by Arthur Conan Doyle?
No, not familiar with it.
Yeah. Really quickly, basically, he takes a plane higher than anyone else has, and at that time it was, I forget exactly high, about 25,000 feet. And he gets up there and he finds an entire world of monsters above the clouds and living in the clouds. So it reminds me a lot of that, although it goes in a totally different direction, of course.
Oh, now I'm going to have to read that. Yeah, I thought
my favorite Arcandora short story.
Yeah, Aloft was really good. I really didn't know where he was going at first, and I liked how he waited to build the characters until the weird stuff started. I think of the three novellas, it was the one that was. I don't know. Well, I don't know if it was the best written, but it was the one that I really think we got to see him flex his muscles with the prose, and I really dug it. So now the one you didn't like, Rain, which I still liked. I definitely could see the argument that it's the weaker of the weakest of the four. But so Rain is an apocalypse novel, basically like a weird apocalypse novel, which apparently the King family is really into right now because we have the Firemen, we have this one Rain, and Sleeping Beauties, which I'm currently 150 pages into, and so this seems to be a thing that they're doing a lot of right now. As far as Joe's take on it, he did say in the notes that he was kind of satirizing himself with the firemen. And I'm not quite sure I understood what he did here that was satirizing what he did, other than that he wrote something short. But Rain is basically. Aloft and Rain both kind of can basically they make up the title Strange Weather, I think, because they're both strange weather stories. And so in Rain, there's like this storm that sends needles down from the sky, and it creates over Colorado. And so basically, he does an apocalypse travel novel, which I just finished one called End of the World Running Club, which was really good right before this. So it was interesting to read Rain because it had like similar moments. But what I appreciated about Rain was that it showed that he could. I guess maybe this is the counterpoint to the Fireman, because he did an End of the World in 100 pages here, and in my mind did it much more effectively. But you did not like Rain. What was your problem with Rain?
I wasn't really thrilled with this. I think one reason is because I found the other three stories much stronger, and it just didn't keep my interest too much because of that. I was not convinced by the travel. Something like this is going on. Would somebody go to that much problem to travel like that? I also didn't really find the ideal of the rain all that apocalyptic, so I should say.
Well, I'll tell you something that was
not.
well.
That did not sit on me very well.
Okay, well, I'll tell you something that was interesting for me about Rain is that the main character. I was confused about the gender of the main character when I was reading the story, and I'm still not entirely certain. I think it was a woman was the main character, but that is one interesting thing where, and maybe it was because I was just reading really fast because I was getting towards the end. I felt like I got the story, but at the same time, there was like I had thought the character was a man, and then I was like, oh wait, no, this is a woman, or oh maybe not. And then I decided that I wasn't going to focus on that, so perhaps that's my fault. But the main character, are you saying the thing that you didn't buy about it was that the main character travels across the wasteland to basically tell the father that his daughter is dead? Or were you saying that you didn't believe that he would go through that trouble just to say, "Hey, somebody's dead"?
Yeah, pretty much. But what you just said kind of also confirms, emphasized how I felt about it. I didn't really feel enough of the character to feel that they would go to this length. I didn't feel that what compared to let's say the boy in Snapshot. I didn't feel I really had enough information to get into that character.
That's interesting. Yeah. Um, well, and that's the thing. Like, I didn't understand why it was so important for this person to travel, to tell the father. But then, for me, it worked because I felt like, oh, now I appreciate that this person was so important to them. That added weight to the character for me. So that's why it worked for me, kind of in reverse. Because I'm okay going along with the character, and then if you backload my concern for the character, it's not ideal, but it worked for me. I was okay with it, but and I thought the storm with the needle rain was kind of an interesting concept, and I just appreciated that it was, you know, not overdone. You know, that brought it in nice and short, but yeah, I can definitely see that it is the weakest of the three stories. So so it is interesting that he saved it for last. Like I maybe would have switched loaded and rain, had rain go second, and loaded and I think would have been a better ending to the collection. But and I don't usually question the placement of stories, but I definitely think that switching rain and loaded would have made the book much stronger.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Loaded was the most powerful story, was the most would have been the most powerful to end on.
Yeah, and yeah, but overall, you know, especially after my dislike of the fireman, I was really excited to like this book, and to be excited about it. And because I do, as a person, I really like Joe Hill. I enjoy his interviews. I enjoy listening to him talk, and um, I think he's a really neat artist, and you know, I've enjoyed seeing him at public events and listening to him. So I'm rooting for the guy. I didn't want Fireman to not be good, in my opinion, right? So
Right.
so it feels good. It feels good to like Strange Weather. So well, if anybody's listening, I hope they enjoyed like hearing a discussion of Strange Weather, because we obviously take very seriously the our reading and our appreciation of these books. So we've done other discussions. We talked about The Boy on the Bridge by M.R. Carey, Marvin and I, Feral by B.K. Evanson. So we've done this before, so you can find other recordings of us talking about books here on YouTube, which is where I put them up. And yeah, I would just say, to wrap up, I think Strange Weather is definitely a must read this year. I'm not sure it's going to make my top 10 list for the year, because it's been a really good year. How about you? Do you think it's going to be on your top 10 or?
I doubt it. Although I did, despite my not caring for the fourth story, I did give it 4.5 stars out of 5 stars. So I obviously did like it very much. Um, you know, the thing is, well, it's a collection technically. Um, this is a good year for collections too. There's a lot of good novella collections, short story collections out there, and there's a lot of competition. So I'm not even sure I would call it the best collection, although I'm sure it would be in my top five.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've read a ton of collections this year, so I'd have to look at that. I'd have to go back and look. I know I hit my reading goal of 70 books with the book I read before this one, so for the year. So I've read quite a bit this year, but I'm not sure if I read a collection or how many collections I read. But yeah, this is really solid stuff. So, and I think you've convinced me that I made the promise to myself that I was only going to read books from this year during 2017. So I'll have to wait till next year to read Heart Shaped Box, but I will read it next year. And but yeah, Strange Weather. I think people will dig it. And you know, like, I think it's great that, in a sense, we're gonna have a version of Stephen King for many, many, many years to come because he's done such a wonderful job of raising writers in his family. So, and that's evidence in Strange Weather. So, anything else you want to say, Marvin?
Uh, no, I don't think so. Like I said, I do recommend Strange Weather. I think, especially if one likes novellas, and I happen to love novellas, it certainly is worth getting. And like we said, you get four for the price of one, so it worked out pretty good that way too.
Yeah, indeed. All right. So this is us signing off. Check out our reviews in the near future on dreadcentral.com. So thanks a lot.